What if I told you that the single most powerful thing you could do for your heart, the one exercise that a Stanford-trained physician who has spent decades studying longevity calls the foundation of everything, is not the workout you're probably doing right now? It's not HIIT. It's not CrossFit. It's not the brutal 45-minute spin class that leaves you gasping on the floor. In fact, it's almost the opposite. And here's what's wild. Most people who do it are doing it completely wrong, which means they're leaving almost all of the benefits on the table. Today we're going to change that. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is all about taking the most cutting-edge science on health, fitness, and longevity and translating it into things you can actually use in your real life. And today's topic is one I've been wanting to do a deep dive on for a long time because I think it might be the most important, most misunderstood concept in cardiovascular health right now. We are talking about Zone 2 training, specifically the way Dr. Peter Attia thinks about it, prescribes it, and practices it himself. By the end of this video, you are going to understand not just what it is, but why it works at a cellular level, how to find your personal Zone 2, exactly how much you need to do, and the common mistakes that quietly destroy your results. So let's get into it. First, let me tell you a little bit about why Peter Attia's opinion on this matters so much. Because this isn't just some fitness influencer talking about their favorite workout. Peter Attia is a medical doctor who trained at Stanford and Johns Hopkins. He spent years studying cancer at the National Cancer Institute. He runs a private medical practice entirely focused on longevity and lifespan extension. He's the host of the Drive podcast, which is one of the most scientifically rigorous health podcasts in the world. And he wrote a book called Outlive that became a bestseller because it genuinely changes the way people think about how to live a long, healthy life. When Attia says something is the cornerstone of heart health and longevity, it's worth paying very close attention. And what does he say? He says that if he could only prescribe one form of exercise to every single one of his patients, just one it would be Zone 2 cardio. He's said it in dozens of podcast episodes, he writes about it extensively, and he practices it himself, doing around 3 to 4 sessions of Zone 2 training every single week. This is not a trend. This is not a fad. The science behind this goes decades deep, and once you understand it, you will never look at a slow, easy jog the same way again. So let's start at the very beginning. What actually is Zone 2? You've probably heard of heart rate zones before. The basic idea is that your cardiovascular intensity can be broken down into different zones, usually 5, based on what percentage of your maximum heart rate you're working at. Zone 1 is basically just walking around, your heart is barely elevated. Zone 3 and 4 are what most people think of as a moderate to hard workout. You're breathing heavy, you're sweating, but you can still push through. Zone 5 is all-out maximum effort, the kind of thing you can only sustain for a few minutes at best. Zone 2 sits right in that low to moderate intensity range. Numerically, it's roughly 60 to 75% of your maximum heart rate. But Attia is quick to point out that heart rate percentages can be misleading because everybody's physiology is different. So he prefers a more precise definition, and it's this. Zone 2 is the highest intensity of exercise at which your body can still rely almost entirely on your mitochondria to produce energy through a process called oxidative phosphorylation before your body starts to meaningfully accumulate lactate in the blood. Let me translate that into plain English because it matters. Your muscles have 2 main ways to produce energy during exercise. One is through your mitochondria, using oxygen and fat as fuel. This is clean, efficient, and sustainable. The other is a backup system called anaerobic glycolysis, which kicks in when you push harder than your aerobic system can handle. This backup system burns glucose and produces lactate as a byproduct. In small amounts, lactate is fine, your body can recycle it, but when you're working hard enough that lactate builds up faster than you can clear it, that's when you've crossed out of Zone 2. A simpler way to think about it is the talk test. In Zone 2, you should be able to hold a full conversation. Not easily, you'll notice you're working, but you can speak in complete sentences without gasping. The moment you can't do that anymore, you've left Zone 2. This might sound almost too easy, and that's actually one of the biggest traps people fall into. We've been conditioned by the no pain, no gain mentality to think that if an exercise isn't brutally hard, it isn't working. Zone 2 flies in the face of that idea completely, and the science explains exactly why. Here's where it gets really fascinating. To understand why Zone 2 training is so powerful for your heart and your long-term health, you have to understand mitochondria. And I know, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell is the joke that never dies. But I'm being serious here. Your mitochondria are absolutely central to this story. Every cell in your body contains mitochondria. Their job is to take the food you eat, the fats and carbohydrates, and convert them into ATP, which is the actual energy currency your cells run on. Your heart muscle cells are absolutely packed with mitochondria because your heart never stops working. It beats around 100,000 times every single day, and it needs a constant, reliable, massive supply of energy to do that. Now here's what happens as we age and as we become more sedentary. Our mitochondria get fewer in number, they get smaller, and they get less efficient. They don't produce energy as effectively, they produce more damaging byproducts, and they don't communicate with each other as well. This mitochondrial decline is now understood to be one of the central mechanisms behind not just cardiovascular disease, but also metabolic dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and even cancer. Peter Attia talks about this at length. The mitochondria are not just the powerhouse of the cell, they are the health of the cell. And here is the beautiful part. Zone 2 training is the single most effective stimulus for what scientists call mitochondrial biogenesis, which means the creation of new mitochondria. When you exercise consistently in Zone 2, you are literally signaling your cells to grow more mitochondria, make existing ones more efficient, and increase their ability to burn fat as fuel. This is a profound biological adaptation. You are upgrading the engine of every single cell in your body. Your heart cells get more mitochondria, your skeletal muscle cells get more mitochondria, everything works better, more efficiently, with more reserve capacity. Attia frequently collaborates with Dr. Íñigo San Millán, who is one of the world's leading researchers on exercise physiology and mitochondrial function. San Millán works with professional cyclists at the Tour de France level, and he's found that the athletes with the highest mitochondrial density, essentially the most powerful engines, are the ones who dominate their sport. And he and Attia agree that the primary driver of that mitochondrial density is Zone 2 training volume. Not the flashy, painful, high-intensity stuff. The long, slow, consistent aerobic work. Now let's talk about what this means specifically for your heart, because the heart benefits of Zone 2 are layered and remarkable. The first and most obvious benefit is something called stroke volume. That's the amount of blood your heart pumps with each single beat. When you train in Zone 2 consistently over weeks and months, your heart adapts by getting bigger and stronger. Specifically, the left ventricle, which is the main pumping chamber, increases in size. This means your heart can push out more blood per beat. And here's why that matters. When your heart can pump more blood per beat, it doesn't have to beat as often to deliver the same amount of oxygen to your muscles and organs. This is why highly trained athletes have resting heart rates in the 40s or even the 30s. Their hearts are so efficient that one beat delivers what used to take two. And a lower resting heart rate is strongly associated with longer life and reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. The second benefit is something called capillary density. When you do Zone 2 training, your body grows more tiny blood vessels, capillaries, throughout your muscles, including your heart muscle. More capillaries mean better oxygen delivery, better nutrient delivery, better waste removal, and critically, better insulin sensitivity. This is a structural change in your cardiovascular system. You are building a more extensive and efficient plumbing network in your body. This one adaptation alone has enormous implications for metabolic health, because better insulin sensitivity means better blood sugar control, which is tightly connected to cardiovascular disease risk. The third benefit, and this one really connects back to the mitochondria conversation, is metabolic flexibility. This is the ability of your body to switch smoothly between burning fat and burning carbohydrates depending on what's available and what's needed. In Zone 2, your body is almost entirely burning fat for fuel. The more you train in this zone, the better your body gets at accessing fat stores, which means you're less dependent on a constant sugar supply, you're better at stabilizing blood glucose, and your heart, which actually prefers to burn fat rather than glucose, gets more efficient at doing exactly that. Peter Attia considers metabolic flexibility one of the most important markers of long-term health, and Zone 2 training is perhaps the most direct way to build it. Now, I want to talk about VO2 max because this is the other piece of the cardiovascular puzzle that Attia is obsessed with, and it connects directly to Zone 2. VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can consume and use during intense exercise. It's measured in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. And here is the most important sentence I'm going to say in this entire video. VO2 max is the single strongest predictor of all-cause mortality that we have. More than smoking status, more than blood pressure, more than cholesterol. People with low VO2 max are at dramatically higher risk of dying from all causes. Heart disease, cancer, everything, compared to people with high VO2 max. After age 30, VO2 max declines at roughly 10% per decade if you do nothing about it. By the time most people are in their 60s and 70s, their VO2 max has dropped so low that basic activities of daily life, walking upstairs, carrying groceries, getting up off the floor, are genuinely challenging. Attia calls this the marginal decade, the last decade of your life, and he argues that almost everything you're doing in your health and fitness life right now should be in service of making that marginal decade as vibrant and capable as possible. So where does Zone 2 fit with VO2 max? This is where it gets elegant. Attia uses a metaphor of a pyramid. The base of the pyramid is your Zone 2 aerobic efficiency, your mitochondrial capacity, your fat-burning ability, your cardiovascular base. The peak of the pyramid is your VO2 max, and the total area of that pyramid is your overall cardiovascular engine. To have the biggest possible engine, you want both a wide base and a high peak, and the research, along with practical wisdom from elite sports coaches, consistently shows that the best way to build that is roughly an 80-20 split, 80% of your training time in Zone 2, 20% in truly high-intensity work targeting VO2 max. If you try to skip the Zone 2 work and just do all high intensity, you end up with a narrow base and a high peak. You might have a lot of mitochondria, but they're not efficient. You burn out, you get injured more, and you don't build the deep cardiovascular reserve that protects you over decades. Zone 2 is the foundation that makes everything else possible. Alright, so we know what Zone 2 is. We know why it works. Now let's get into the practical side. How do you actually do it? The first question everybody asks is, what kind of exercise should I do? And the good news is that Zone 2 is not tied to any specific activity. Anything that can get you into the right heart rate zone for an extended period of time works. The most common options are cycling, either outdoors or on a stationary bike, and Attia himself often uses a Peloton or similar indoor bike for his Zone 2 sessions. Running or jogging is another classic option, though be aware that running's impact can make it harder to sustain Zone 2 for a full hour without the effort creeping up. Rowing machines are excellent because they engage your whole body. Swimming works. Brisk walking, and I mean genuinely brisk, with some incline if possible, can work too, especially for people who are newer to exercise or dealing with joint issues. Elliptical trainers are also popular because they're low impact and easy to sustain. The key is not the modality, the key is the intensity. You have to actually be in Zone 2. So how do you find your Zone 2? There are a few ways. The most precise method is a formal lactate threshold test, where you exercise at progressively higher intensities, while a technician takes small blood samples to measure the lactate levels in your blood. When your lactate hits around 2 millimoles per liter, you're at the top of Zone 2. Attia actually does this with his patients and himself. It's the gold standard. But most people aren't going to go to a lab, so practically speaking, you can use two simpler methods. One is the talk test I mentioned earlier. You should be able to speak in complete sentences without gasping. If you can sing, you're probably not working hard enough. If you can't get through a sentence, you've gone too hard. The second method is heart rate. A common formula is to take 180 minus your age, and use that as a rough upper limit for Zone 2. So if you're 40 years old, your Zone 2 ceiling would be around 140 beats per minute. This isn't perfectly precise for everyone, but it gets most people in the right ballpark. Over time, as you train more, your Zone 2 heart rate ceiling can actually increase, which is a sign that your fitness is improving. A good heart rate monitor, either a chest strap, which tends to be more accurate, or a quality wrist-based device, is really helpful here. It lets you keep an eye on your numbers during the session and make sure you're not drifting too high or staying too low. Now let's talk about the dose. How much Zone 2 do you actually need to do? Peter Attia is pretty direct about this. He says the minimum effective dose he recommends to his patients is 3 hours per week of Zone 2 training. His preferred target is 4 sessions per week, each around 45 to 60 minutes long. More is generally better, up to a point, especially for people who are starting from a lower fitness base and have a lot of ground to make up. He's also clear that each session needs to be a minimum of 45 minutes to meaningfully drive the mitochondrial adaptations you're after. Doing 5 10-minute Zone 2 sessions throughout the day might feel like it adds up to 50 minutes, but it doesn't produce the same biological effect as one continuous 50-minute session. The sustained, uninterrupted nature of the stimulus matters. Your body needs time to deplete glycogen stores and really switch over to fat metabolism, and that takes longer than 15 or 20 minutes. One of the most important things Attia emphasizes is consistency over time. This is not a 6-week program. Zone 2 training, like all meaningful physiological adaptations, takes months to really show up. The mitochondrial changes, the improved stroke volume, the increased capillary density, these take time. You might not feel dramatically different after 2 weeks, but after 3 months, 6 months, a year of consistent Zone 2 training, the changes in your cardiovascular fitness, your metabolic health, and your overall energy levels can be genuinely profound. Attia calls this a lifelong pursuit, and he means it literally.